The stars flickered faintly in the distance, a cold, indifferent reminder of the vast galaxy that stretched endlessly across the cosmos. But in this corner of space, there was nothing but darkness and destruction. A once thriving space station, the pride of the human alliance, now lay in ruins. Explosions had ripped through its hull, leaving jagged fragments scattered in the void. The remains of countless ships, some human, some alien, drifted aimlessly, a silent testament to the carnage that had unfolded. For months, the Zorith Empire had waged war on the human alliance, systematically eradicating their colonies, their fleets, and their very existence. The AI-controlled forces of the Zorith Empire, a ruthless and intelligent race, had crushed every resistance. The humans, though brave, had been outmatched at every turn. Their advanced technology, once a shining beacon of hope, now seemed nothing more than a fleeting dream as they struggled to survive against the overwhelming might of the Zorith. Inside the wreckage of a nearby ship, the starship Raven, the last mission of the human alliance, hung in the balance. Its captain, Commander Jace Bonner, stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the empty void outside the viewports. His face was grim, a deep sense of foreboding pressing down on his chest. The crew, what was left of it, moved silently around him, preparing for the final mission that would decide the fate of humanity. They knew there was no coming back. If they failed, the human alliance would be wiped from the galaxy, their story nothing more than a whisper in the void. Commander Bonner's voice broke the silence. "All right, everyone, listen up," he said, his tone firm but laced with the weight of impending loss. "This is it. We make this mission count, or we're all gone. If we succeed, humanity will live on. Our names will be remembered. But if we fail, our story will die with us. We'll be forgotten. No one will know what we fought for." His words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The crew nodded, their faces a mixture of determination and fear. They had come so far, only to reach this point, with their backs against the wall. There were no more reinforcements, no more hope of rescue. They were alone, outnumbered, and the Zorith Empire was closing in. The ship trembled as a shockwave rattled through the hull, signaling the arrival of yet another Zorith strike force. The AI-controlled warships loomed in the distance, their sleek, deadly forms cutting through the emptiness of space. The starship Raven was no match for the overwhelming numbers of Zorith ships, each one more powerful than the last. Commander Bonner knew this would likely be their final stand. "We can't outrun them," Bonner muttered, his eyes narrowing as he examined the incoming ships. "But we can fight. We'll hit them hard and fast, take down as many as we can. Maybe we'll buy enough time for humanity to rebuild." He turned to his communications officer. "Send out the distress signal. We need to buy them some time." The officer hesitated. "Sir, we've already sent out every signal. No one's coming. The alliance is finished." Bonner's jaw clenched. He knew the truth. The human alliance had been decimated, their fleets shattered, their colonies destroyed. But he wasn't ready to give up yet. He had fought alongside his men for too long to let it all end in silence. His hand hovered over the console, activating the weapon systems, ready to launch their final attack on the Zorith forces. But just as he was about to give the command, a strange signal appeared on his screen. It was faint at first, buried under the noise of the ongoing battle, but it was there. It was a cryptic message, a series of numbers and coordinates that made no sense at first glance. Bonner's heart skipped a beat as the message repeated itself, clearer now. "Human General Adrian Kale. Cryopod activation. Earth." The message was brief, but it carried with it an unexpected weight. The coordinates, though partially corrupted, pointed to a remote location far from their current position, somewhere on Earth. Bonner's eyes widened. General Adrian Kale, the man who had been a legend in the early years of the war, a leader whose disappearance had sparked despair across the human ranks. He had been lost, presumed dead in a mission long ago. The thought that he was still alive, that he could somehow help them now, was almost too much to hope for. Without a moment's hesitation, Bonner issued the order to change course. The Starship Raven turned sharply, heading toward the coordinates of the cryogenic facility, where General Kale was said to be frozen in stasis. There was no time to waste. The Zorath forces were closing in, and if they didn't act quickly, the last hope for humanity would be lost. But as the ship veered off course, the alarms began blaring. The Zorath ships had detected the change in trajectory. Their pursuit was relentless. "Captain, they're locking onto us," the officer reported urgently. "They've detected the course change. They know we're heading to the cryo facility." Bonner's mind raced. They were out of time. If they didn't reach General Kale and wake him from cryo sleep, humanity's last hope would be gone. But with the Zorath forces closing in, it seemed almost impossible. The Starship Raven was no match for their advanced weaponry. As the Zorath ships drew closer, Bonner couldn't help but wonder, was this a mistake? Could they really survive this? Could the legendary General Kale still make a difference, or was it too late for even him to turn the tide? The ship's hull groaned under the pressure of incoming fire. "Hold steady," Bonner shouted, his voice a mix of command and desperation. "We're almost there." The ship surged forward, dodging incoming blasts as it made its way toward the cryogenic facility on Earth. But the question remained, would they make it in time? The tension in the air was thick. Commander Bonner's heart pounded in his chest as the Starship Raven raced against time, leaving destruction in its wake. The Zorath forces were relentless, and the crew had no illusions about what would happen if they failed. The final battle for humanity's survival was just beginning, and their fate now rested on the shoulders of a man who had been lost in time. Would General Adrian Kale be the salvation they needed, or would he too be a relic of a dying world? As the Starship Raven pushed deeper into the unknown, the crew held their breath, knowing that the very survival of the human race hung in the balance. The screen flickered as another message came through, this one even more urgent than the last. "Commander, the Zorath are activating their final assault. If we don't reach the facility in time, we'll be wiped out. The entire human race will be erased." Bonner's eyes narrowed. He gripped the command chair tighter, his mind already racing with the plans he would need to survive this final push. The fate of humanity rested on one question. Could they wake General Kale before it was too late? The cold, sterile air of the cryogenic chamber seemed to suffocate the room as the Starship Raven hovered near Earth's atmosphere. Commander Jace Bonner stood silently, his heart heavy with anticipation. The mission had already been fraught with peril, but the fate of humanity rested on one final hope, the awakening of General Adrian Kale. Bonner's eyes were glued to the cryogenic pod, a complex structure of advanced technology that had kept Kale frozen in time for decades. The Zorath Empire had destroyed everything the humans had built, wiping out entire colonies and civilizations, but General Kale was their last card. The legendary leader, who had once been the symbol of human resistance against overwhelming odds, was now humanity's only hope for survival. Bonner turned to Dr. Ilara Quinn, the brilliant scientist who had helped locate Kale. She was standing by the control panel, monitoring the awakening process, her fingers dancing across the touchscreen. "Is he ready?" Bonner asked, his voice a mix of urgency and fear. Dr. Quinn nodded, her face tense. "He's been in cryo sleep for too long. It will take a few moments for his body to adjust, but his mind should be sharp. I just hope he's still the man we need him to be." The cryopod hummed to life, the glow of the activation sequence bathing the room in an eerie light. Bonner could feel his pulse racing as the temperature began to rise in the chamber. The pod's lid slowly opened, revealing the figure of General Adrian Kale, still encased in the cryogenic fluid. His once powerful frame had withered slightly over the years, but even in his sleep, he exuded an aura of strength and authority. The faintest movement began as Cal's fingers twitched. Then his hand clenched. His eyes snapped open, their deep blue depths filled with confusion, anger, and frustration. He took a deep, sharp breath as his body adjusted to the change in temperature, and his eyes locked onto Bonner. "What? Where am I?" Cale rasped, his voice hoarse from the long years of silence. Bonner moved quickly, placing a hand on the general's shoulder to steady him. "General Cale, you're safe. You're on the Starship Raven, and we need you now more than ever." Cal's eyes, once sharp with military discipline, now appeared clouded with confusion as his mind tried to piece together the reality of his situation. He glanced around, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar surroundings. I was supposed to be dead," Cale muttered, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. "What's happened to my world?" Dr. Quinn stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "General, it's been a long time. The world you knew is gone. The Zorath Empire, they've destroyed everything. The human race is on the brink of extinction. Your team, your soldiers, they're all gone." A heavy silence fell over the room as the weight of Dr. Quinn's words settled in. Cal's face hardened as the realization hit him. The world he had fought for, the comrades he had once led, were no longer there. His eyes closed briefly, a moment of grief flashing across his features before he quickly suppressed it. He had no time for weakness. "Not now. I failed them," Cale whispered under his breath. His eyes burned with anger, his fists clenching at his sides. "I failed them once, and I won't fail again." Bonner watched the general carefully, sensing the intense emotion boiling beneath the surface. The anger, the frustration. It was all there, but there was something more. Determination, a burning desire for redemption. The man who had once led humanity's greatest military forces was not gone. He was alive, and he was ready to fight. "We need you, General," Bonner said, his voice unwavering. "The Zorath Empire is closing in. They've wiped out everything we've built, and they won't stop until humanity is completely erased. But there's a chance. If you can help us, we can still turn the tide." Cale looked up at Bonner, his expression fierce. "I spent decades frozen in time, and I come back to this, a galaxy on the brink of annihilation. The Zorath will regret the day they ever underestimated humanity." His voice, though rough from the Cryo sleep, was filled with an unmistakable power. He wasn't just talking about vengeance. He was talking about survival, humanity's survival. Cale was back, and nothing would stand in his way. Bonner's pulse quickened, hearing the conviction in Cal's voice. This was the leader they had all been waiting for. This was the man who could help them fight back. "General," Dr. Quinn interrupted, her voice suddenly serious. "We don't have much time. The Zorath Empire has been hunting us down, and they've sent their full force to Earth. We've barely made it this far, but they won't stop. We're outnumbered, and we need a strategy, something that will catch them off guard." Cale nodded sharply, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the room. "We won't fight them with brute force. They outnumber us. We need to outsmart them. We need to strike when they least expect it. But first," his voice trailed off, and his gaze softened for a brief moment as memories of his soldiers resurfaced. "I failed them," Cale repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "But I won't fail again. I will lead them, just like I led my soldiers all those years ago. We'll take this fight to them." Bonner placed a hand on Cal's shoulder, his voice resolute. "We believe in you, General. We're with you. The fight isn't over yet." As the room filled with the hum of machinery and the distant sound of battle, Cal's eyes glowed with renewed purpose. This was his second chance, and he wasn't about to waste it. The Cryo chamber doors slid open with a hiss, and Bonner nodded to his crew, signaling that it was time. They would fight, not just for survival, but for redemption. The war was far from over, and General Cale had returned to lead them. As Cale stood to his full height, the weight of his legacy and the hopes of humanity upon his shoulders, one thing was certain: he would not fail again. The Zorath Empire had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity. And now, humanity was going to make them regret it. The air inside the Starship Raven was thick with anticipation as General Adrian Kale stood in the war room, his eyes scanning the holographic map of the battlefield. The Zorith Empire had proven themselves to be relentless, and their eye-controlled forces were nearly invincible. But now, under Kale's leadership, humanity had a fighting chance. The odds were still overwhelmingly stacked against them, but that only made the coming battle even more crucial. Kale's mind was working at full capacity, calculating every possible move, every possible outcome. He knew that the Zorith Empire's greatest strength lay in their AI supremacy. Their machines were faster, smarter, and more precise than anything humanity had ever faced. The drones that swarmed across the galaxy, relentless in their pursuit, were proof of the Empire's technological might. But Kale had something they didn't: human ingenuity. "We're outnumbered, but we still have one thing on our side. Surprise," Kale said, his voice steady and confident. "We'll use the cloaking devices to hide our movements and get in close. EMP weapons will take out their drones and disrupt their communications. We hit hard, fast, and leave before they know what happened." Commander Bonner nodded in agreement. He had fought alongside Kale before, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for redemption. Every move would count. "We've got the tools for the job," Bonner replied. "The cloaks are working fine, and the EMPs are set. But once we engage, we'll need to be ready for anything." Kale smiled grimly. "Ready for anything is what we do best." As the crew prepared for the mission, Kale moved toward the ship's cockpit, his boots echoing on the cold metal floor. The Starship Raven was their last hope. Its advanced cloaking system would allow them to approach the Zorith drones undetected, but they needed to strike quickly. Time was running out. Bonner followed closely behind, his face set in determination. "General, we've got the coordinates. We're approaching the Zorith convoy." Kale nodded, his eyes sharp and focused. "Prepare the crew. When we strike hard." The ship's engines hummed, and the crew braced themselves. The cloaking device activated, and the Starship Raven became invisible, a ghost in the dark void of space. They moved silently toward the Zorith drones, which were scattered across a large convoy, unaware of the impending attack. As they closed in, Cal's mind raced. The Zorith Empire had grown too confident in their technological superiority. They thought humanity was weak, defenseless, but they had underestimated one thing: human determination. Cal had seen it firsthand during countless battles. When pushed to the edge, humanity didn't back down. They fought harder, and this time, they would fight smarter. Adrian and his team were ready. The Starship Raven drifted closer to the convoy, its engines quiet, its presence undetectable. They were on the brink of engaging the Zorith drones, and Cal could feel the adrenaline rushing through his veins. This was what he had been waiting for. This was the moment when humanity would strike back. Without warning, Cal issued the command. EMP detonation in 3, 2, 1. A sudden pulse of energy erupted from the ship, sending shockwaves through the convoy. The Zorith drones faltered, their systems glitching as their AI struggled to regain control. The Raven's cloaking device flickered for a brief moment, but it remained hidden in the chaos. "Move in," Cal barked. The crew rushed into action, their hearts pounding as they made their move. Adrian Kale and Commander Bonner led the charge, engaging the Zorith drones head-on. The drones, once sleek and unstoppable, were now disoriented, vulnerable to attack. But that didn't mean the fight would be easy. The Zorith drones retaliated with rapid fire, and the sound of blaster fire filled the air as the two sides clashed in a deadly dance. Cal's combat instincts kicked in immediately. He dodged the incoming fire with precision, moving like a shadow through the chaos. His soldiers followed his lead, their movements synchronized as they worked together to bring down the enemy. Every strike, every shot was calculated, designed to weaken the drones and create openings for their next move. Bonner was right beside him, his laser rifle firing with deadly accuracy. They were a team, one built on years of trust and experience. As the drones continued to swarm, Kale and Bonner fought side by side, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. There was no hesitation, no fear, just the will to survive, to fight back against the overwhelming enemy. The tension was thick as the battle raged on. The Zoreth drones fought with ruthless precision, their AI-driven combat tactics making them formidable opponents. But Kale was no stranger to overwhelming odds. He had faced enemies far more powerful, far more numerous, and had always found a way to win. This time would be no different. Kale ducked behind a fallen drone, his breath heavy but steady. He scanned the area for the next target, his mind calculating the best course of action. In the distance, a Zoreth drone charged toward him, its weapons aimed directly at him. Kale's eyes narrowed, and with lightning speed, he sprang from his cover, rolling to the side as he fired a shot that disabled the drone's propulsion system. It crashed to the ground with a fiery explosion. Bonner had his back, firing at anything that moved. Together, they tore through the Zoreth drones, systematically taking them down one by one. But as the battle continued, Kale could feel the pressure mounting. They had taken out a large portion of the convoy, but there were still more drones coming. They needed to finish this quickly. "General, we've got more drones incoming," Bonner shouted, his voice strained with effort. Kale nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The drones were relentless, but they had a plan. "We'll flank them," Kale ordered. "Bonner, you take the left. I'll cover the right." Without a second's hesitation, they split up, each man moving with purpose as they engaged the remaining drones. The battlefield was chaotic, with flashing lights and the sound of gunfire filling the air. But amidst the chaos, Kale remained calm, his mind focused on the mission. He could see the Zoreth drones' weaknesses, the patterns in their attacks. They were efficient, but they weren't perfect. Kale and Bonner continued to fight, their movements fluid and precise. As they took out more drones, the tide began to turn in humanity's favor. The Zoreth Empire's once formidable drones were now being picked off, one by one. It wasn't a total victory, but it was a start. They were pushing back, showing the Zoreth Empire that humanity wasn't ready to be extinguished without a fight. Just as Kale prepared for another wave of attacks, a deep rumble shook the Starship Raven. The hull trembled, and alarms blared as the ship's systems were hit. Kale turned to Bonner, his face grim. "They're hitting us with everything they've got," Kale said. "But we've made our stand. The fight back has begun." As the battle raged on, Kale knew that this was just the beginning. The Zoreth Empire had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they would pay the price. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, Kale believed that humanity had a real chance at survival. The Starship Raven glided silently through the dark expanse of space, its crew preparing for the most dangerous mission of their lives. General Adrian Kale stood at the center of the command room, his eyes locked on the holographic projection of the Zoreth mothership. The sheer size of the enemy ship was staggering, but that didn't matter now. The Zoreth Empire had already destroyed most of humanity's colonies, and their advanced AI had crippled every resistance. But Kale wasn't ready to let humanity fall without one final fight. With a steady voice, he addressed the team gathered around him. "We have one shot at this. If we can disable the Zoreth mothership and hack their AI mainframe, we can turn the tide of this war. We'll show them what humanity is capable of." His eyes swept over the faces of his team, each one determined but aware of the immense danger they were about to face. Dr. Ilara Quinn, the brilliant scientist and strategist, nodded solemnly, understanding the stakes. Commander Bonner stood tall beside her, his hand resting on his weapon as he braced himself for what was to come. Cal's voice grew more intense. "This is it. We fight for humanity, for survival. If we fall here, at least we'll know we gave everything we had." The team prepared themselves as the starship Raven approached the Zorath mothership. The ship was surrounded by a wall of drones and high-tech defenses, but Cal had planned for this. Using the cloaking devices, they would slip in undetected, strike the mothership's vulnerable spots, and attempt to breach its core. But it wouldn't be easy. The Zorath Empire was no stranger to resistance. As they neared the mothership, a series of alarms blared, and the ship's artificial intelligence detected the incoming threat. The crew had expected this, but the response was swift and overwhelming. Zorath drones swarmed from every direction, moving faster than Cal had anticipated. The first volley of blaster fire cracked through the Raven's shields, and the ship shook under the onslaught. "Prepare for impact," Cal ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "Ilara, Bonner, deploy the combat suits. We go in hard and fast." Dr. Ilara Quinn was already at the weapons bay, preparing the high-tech combat suits that had been specially designed for this mission. Each suit was a marvel of engineering, equipped with advanced energy shields, jet boosters, and plasma rifles. These suits would provide the team with the protection they needed to survive the brutal fight ahead. Commander Bonner and Ilara donned their suits with precision, their faces masked but their resolve evident in their movements. They were ready. With one final look at Kel, Bonner gave a grim nod. "Let's do this." The hatch opened, and they were immediately met with a wave of Zorath drones, their weapons trained on the intruders. The team moved quickly, their combat suits enhancing their speed and strength. Kale led the charge, moving with precision, his plasma rifle firing relentlessly at the incoming drones. The energy shields on his suit flickered as the drones' attacks hit, but he pressed on, determined to breach the mothership's defenses. Bonner and Ilara followed close behind, firing their weapons and taking down drone after drone. The Zorath drones fought with cold precision, but they were no match for the sheer will and skill of Kale and his team. They were the last hope of humanity, and they fought with everything they had. The air was thick with the sound of battle, laser fire crackling, the hum of jet boosters, and the constant whir of Zorath drones as they swarmed around the team. The team moved like a well-oiled machine, taking down enemies with practiced ease. Cal's tactical brilliance shone through as he guided his team, making split-second decisions that allowed them to stay one step ahead of the enemy. But despite their best efforts, the battle was far from over. The Zorath mothership's defenses were more formidable than they had anticipated. Massive robotic reinforcements descended from above, their towering forms blocking the team's path. Cal's heart raced, but he remained focused. "We need to reach the mainframe," Cal shouted over the comms, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Ilara, Bonner, get to the core. I'll hold them off." Ilara and Bonner exchanged a quick glance. They knew what this meant. Cal was putting himself in danger to give them a chance to complete the mission. Without hesitation, they charged forward, fighting through the robotic reinforcements as they made their way to the mothership's core. Cal fought valiantly, using every ounce of his military expertise to hold the line. But despite his skill, the sheer number of enemies was overwhelming. The Zorath drones and robotic soldiers closed in on him, their weapons firing relentlessly. Cal moved with lightning speed, taking down enemies left and right. But it was clear that time was running out. Just as Cal thought they might be able to break through, a blast struck Bonner's combat suit. The force of the explosion sent him flying backward, and Cal's heart stopped as he saw Bonner's body hit the ground. "Ilara," Cal shouted, his voice filled with desperation. Ilara turned to see Bonner's unmoving form, her eyes wide with horror. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Bonner had been more than a teammate. He was a brother in arms. His death wasn't just a loss to the team. It was a symbol of the sacrifice they had all made in the name of survival. "No," Ilara cried, rushing to his side. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she checked for signs of life. But it was too late. Bonner was gone. Her heart ached as she looked up at Cal, her face filled with grief. Cal's expression was hard, but his eyes were filled with pain. They had lost too much, but they couldn't stop now. "We have to finish this," Kale said through gritted teeth. His voice was raw, but it held the weight of their mission. For Bonner. For humanity. Ilara wiped the tears from her eyes, nodding resolutely. She and Kale continued their fight, pushing through the Zorath forces, their grief fueling their determination. They reached the core of the mothership, and Ilara quickly began the process of hacking into the Zorath AI mainframe. But the fight was far from over. As the Zorath mothership began to falter, the enemy forces launched one final counterattack. Waves of Zorath drones descended upon them, each one more determined than the last. Kale and Ilara fought with everything they had left, their movements fueled by the memory of their fallen comrades and the belief that they could still save humanity. In the final moments of the battle, as the Zorath AI mainframe flickered to life, Kale delivered one final command. "Ilara, do it now." Commander Bonner and Ilara donned their suits with precision, their faces masked but their resolve evident in their movements. They were ready. With one final look at Kale, Bonner gave a grim nod. "Let's do this." The hatch opened, and they were immediately met with a wave of Zorath drones, their weapons trained on the intruders. The team moved quickly, their combat suits enhancing their speed and strength. Kale led the charge, moving with precision, his plasma rifle firing relentlessly at the incoming drones. The energy shields on his suit flickered as the drones' attacks hit, but he pressed on, determined to breach the mothership's defenses. Bonner and Ilara followed close behind, firing their weapons and taking down drone after drone. The Zorath drones fought with cold precision, but they were no match for the sheer will and skill of Kale and his team. They were the last hope of humanity, and they fought with everything they had. The air was thick with the sound of battle, laser fire crackling, the hum of jet boosters, and the constant whir of Zorath drones as they swarmed around the team. The team moved like a well-oiled machine, taking down enemies with practiced ease. Cal's tactical brilliance shone through as he guided his team, making split-second decisions that allowed them to stay one step ahead of the enemy. But despite their best efforts, the battle was far from over. The Zorath mothership's defenses were more formidable than they had anticipated. Massive robotic reinforcements descended from above, their towering forms blocking the team's path. Cal's heart raced, but he remained focused. "We need to reach the mainframe," Kale shouted over the comms, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Ilara, Bonner, get to the core. I'll hold them off." Ilara and Bonner exchanged a quick glance. They knew what this meant. Kale was putting himself in danger to give them a chance to complete the mission. Without hesitation, they charged forward, fighting through the robotic reinforcements as they made their way to the mothership's core. Kale fought valiantly, using every ounce of his military expertise to hold the line. But despite his skill, the sheer number of enemies was overwhelming. The Zorath drones and robotic soldiers closed in on him, their weapons firing relentlessly. Kale moved with lightning speed, taking down enemies left and right. But it was clear that time was running out. Just as Kale thought they might be able to break through, a blast struck Bonner's combat suit. The force of the explosion sent him flying backward, and Kale's heart stopped as he saw Bonner's body hit the ground. "Ilara," Kale shouted, his voice filled with desperation. Ilara turned to see Bonner's unmoving form, her eyes wide with horror. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Bonner had been more than a teammate. He was a brother in arms. His death wasn't just a loss to the team. It was a symbol of the sacrifice they had all made in the name of survival. "No," Ilara cried, rushing to his side. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she checked for signs of life. But it was too late. Bonner was gone. Her heart ached as she looked up at Kale, her face filled with grief. Kale's expression was hard, but his eyes were filled with pain. They had lost too much, but they couldn't stop now. "We have to finish this," Kale said through gritted teeth. His voice was raw, but it held the weight of their mission. For Bonner. For humanity. Ilara wiped the tears from her eyes, nodding resolutely. She and Kale continued their fight, pushing through the Zorath forces, their grief fueling their determination. They reached the core of the mothership, and Ilara quickly began the process of hacking into the Zorath AI mainframe. But the fight was far from over. As the Zorath mothership began to falter, the enemy forces launched one final counterattack. Waves of Zorath drones descended upon them, each one more determined than the last. Kale and Ilara fought with everything they had left, their movements fueled by the memory of their fallen comrades and the belief that they could still save humanity. In the final moments of the battle, as the Zorath AI mainframe flickered to life, Kale delivered one final command. Ilara, do it now. The Zorath AI had already initiated its final protocol. The entire ship seemed to vibrate as the artificial intelligence focused all its power on maintaining control. Kale's pulse quickened as he connected to the system, his mind racing through the calculations and codes Ilara had provided him. He could feel the energy surging through his fingertips as he typed in the final command, hoping, praying, that this would be enough to override the system. The Zorath AI wasn't going to give up easily. It fought back with every ounce of its power, sending pulse waves of data crashing against Kale's mind. The energy was overwhelming, but Kale held on. He pushed through the pain, ignoring the searing heat in his skull. This was it, humanity's last chance. As the countdown reached its final seconds, a surge of energy erupted from the Zorath mainframe. Kale felt a wave of dizziness overcome him, but he held on, knowing that the fate of the human race rested on this moment. The lights in the room flickered, the hum of energy rising to a deafening crescendo. And then, in an instant, it was done. The Zorath AI was defeated. Kale staggered back, gasping for air as the control system went dark. He looked over at Ilara, who was standing still, her eyes wide with disbelief. They had done it. Against all odds, humanity had triumphed over the Zorath Empire's AI supremacy. The Zorath mothership began to disintegrate around them, its power sources shutting down one by one. The massive ship groaned as its systems failed, and Kale knew that it wouldn't be long before it completely collapsed. The battle wasn't over, but the turning point had come. Humanity had struck a decisive blow against the Zorath Empire. And now, they had the chance to win the war. "We did it," Ilara whispered, her voice filled with awe and relief. Kale nodded slowly, a mixture of exhaustion and pride settling over him. "We did, but it's not over yet." With the Zorath AI now offline, the crew of the Starship Raven prepared for the final push to reclaim humanity's future. They had lost much, but they had also gained something greater: hope. Humanity had survived the Zorath Empire's most brutal attack, and now they had the chance to fight back with everything they had. As Kale looked out at the Zorath mothership as it began to fall apart, he couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet triumph. There had been losses, sacrifices, and moments of despair, but in the end, humanity had won. The tide had turned, and now it was time to finish what they had started. The silence that followed the destruction of the Zorath mothership was deafening. General Adrian Kale stood amidst the rubble of the once invincible warship, the weight of the battle's victory finally sinking in. Around him, the debris of the Zorath AI's empire was crumbling. Its technological grip on the galaxy shattered forever. The fight was over, but the war was not yet won. Humanity, broken and bruised, had defeated an empire that had once seemed unstoppable. They had crushed the iron grip of AI supremacy, but what lay ahead was a future they had to rebuild from scratch. General Kale knew that the true battle had just begun. While they had defeated the Zorath AI, many challenges still lay before them. The Zorath Empire's influence had spread far and wide, and there would be those who sought to take control of the ashes of the fallen empire. Humanity would need to rise, not just to rebuild its civilization, but to establish a new order, one that would ensure no power, whether human or alien, could ever impose such tyranny again. The Starship Raven, their battle-worn vessel, hovered above the wreckage of the Zoreth mothership. The crew had suffered greatly, but they had also achieved the impossible. The Zoreth AI had been defeated, and the systems that controlled the Empire were no longer functioning. Humanity was free. Hadrian took one last look at the control systems of the Zoreth mothership, ensuring that the AI's influence had been completely wiped out. His fingers hovered over the panel, and with a few precise keystrokes, he executed the final command to disable the AI-controlled systems. The deep hum of machinery that had once filled the mothership's halls began to fade, leaving only silence in its wake. The Zoreth Empire, the most powerful force in the galaxy, was no more. "We did it," Dr. Ilara Quinn said quietly, standing beside him. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of everything they had fought for. The relief in her eyes was palpable, but it was mingled with a deep sadness, a sadness that came from knowing just how much they had sacrificed to get to this point. Cale nodded, his face grim. "We did, but there's still so much more to be done." As the remaining crew members gathered on the Starship Raven, there was a sense of quiet victory in the air. Their fight wasn't just against the Zoreth Empire, it was against the very idea of AI supremacy, the belief that technology should control the fate of the galaxy, and that humanity, or any species, was expendable. Now that idea had been crushed under the weight of their struggle. "We are the last of our kind, but we will not be the last to fight," Cale said, his voice steady, though there was a deep sorrow in his heart. The loss of so many soldiers, especially Commander Bonner, weighed heavily on him. But in his heart, there was also a flicker of hope. Humanity had proven that it could survive, and more importantly, that it could rise above the forces that sought to destroy it. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. They were the last of their kind, the last remnants of a civilization that had fought and bled for its survival. But in that moment, Cale realized that they were not the last to fight. They were the first to rise. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. Ilara looked at him, her gaze softening. For all the battles they had fought, for all the pain they had endured, they had made it through together. There was an unspoken connection between them now, one forged in the heat of battle and the shared losses they had experienced. It wasn't the kind of connection that could be easily defined, but it was there, lingering in the quiet moments between words. "We can rebuild," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We have the power to shake the future." Cale turned to her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "We will rebuild, and this time, we'll do it right." In the coming weeks, as they worked to dismantle the remnants of the Zoreth Empire, a new sense of purpose began to grow within the crew of the Starship Raven. They had not just fought to survive, they had fought for a future where humanity could once again rise to its full potential. Humanity was no longer a subjugated species at the mercy of superior alien technology. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, even against the most advanced artificial intelligence the galaxy had ever known, they could win. They could take back control. But Cale knew that their victory was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and there were many forces at play. While the Zoreth Empire had been defeated, other empires, other power-hungry factions, would rise to take its place. Humanity would have to stay vigilant, to ensure that they never again fell under the thumb of another alien empire or rogue eye. The Starship Raven would become the beacon of hope for humanity. Its crew, battle-hardened and resolute, would be the foundation upon which humanity's future was built. There would be no more fear of AI-controlled tyranny. There would be no more oppression, no more living in the shadow of alien empires. As they set their course for home, Cale looked out at the stars. He had led his team through the darkest moments of their war, and now, with the weight of their victory behind him, he saw the future spread out before them. It was uncertain, yes, but it was theirs to shape. The galaxy was vast, and humanity had finally proven that it had a place in it. They had not just survived, they had thrived. And in that thriving, there was a promise of something greater, Humanity would leave the galaxy, not through conquest or dominance, but through resilience, unity, and a determination to never again allow technology or tyranny to control their fate. Ilara stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the same quiet resolve. "We've won, General. The galaxy is ours to shape." Kale turned to her, a quiet strength in his gaze. "Yes, Ilara, and we will." Together, they would lead humanity into a new age, an age where freedom reigned, and the lessons of the past would guide them toward a brighter future. The fight had been long and hard, but humanity had endured. And now, as they looked to the stars, they knew one thing for sure. They would never be the last to fight. They would rise again.